This is the Hype Squad with Charli McConnell, a podcast where women can be full of themselves and brag about what they're good at. Each week, we're going to bring you conversations covering topics like motherhood, life, relationships, business, and everything in between, because anything is possible with your very own Hype Squad. What's up, ladies? Welcome back to the Hype Squad. I'm Charli McConnell, your host, and today we have Rachel Maine on. She is a sex and relationship coach. Her journey started over a decade ago when she started a business involving sexual education, which led her to going back to school for a certificate in sex therapy and sexuality education. Shortly after, she started her podcast, Owning Your Sexual Self, and is now the CEO of her online sex coaching business, Wellness Expertise. Rachel works with women, men, and couples to help them discover their sexual desires and create intimate, adventurous connections with themselves and their partners. Rachel, welcome to the Hype Squad.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm so excited you're here. So Rachel and I go back at this point. I mean, it's a year or two, I guess. I'm terrible at tracking time, but we met through the coaching program that I went to for sex and relationship coaching. And Rachel had already gone through the course and was there as a facilitator. And I'm just so excited to talk to you again. I feel like it's been way too long.
Way too long. I agree.
Yeah. So I saw your stories last week or the week before, and I immediately reached out to you on Instagram to get you to come on and talk more about this. You were talking about new clients and really having to reprogram the messages that they had received in their childhoods about intimacy. And listening to you talk about that, I just immediately thought, ding, ding, this is going to be such a good conversation. I reached out for you to come on and talk more about it. Because I feel like it comes up with me, my clients, my friends, everyone around me, like we are raised thinking one thing and then we spend the majority of our adulthood trying to reprogram that as best we can. So tell me what that looks like from your perspective with clients you've worked with, and let's just dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that when I was going through school back at U of M, when I decided, okay, I'm going to do like the professional side, I'm going to do this education thing. I want to be a sex therapist. When I had joined that business, I went to one of their conferences and they had sex therapists on stage talking about doing sex therapy. I was like, holy shit, this is a thing. Like I could do this for a living. And then that's what led me to actually reaching out, like finding Lex, doing the business, the coaching side, the facilitator side, learning how to do retreats, all the things. But really, whether it's in the coaching space or therapy space, because I do work in private practice now, so people that are in Michigan, I get to serve them locally, and then my coaching people, right, we get to work with them all over the world, which is really neat. But no matter where they're from, wherever they're at in their journey, like one of the very first things I do with them is go through this sex timeline with them. And sometimes when people are coming into the coaching space or the therapy space, they might not want to dive right into the whole one-on-one work. They might not want to commit to a 3 to 6 or however long month journey. So I created it as a like a little mini thing that you can go and to find it on my website, just called Desire Your Sex Life. And so, I'm sorry, Discover Your Sex Life. And so with that, you get this sex timeline thing that I'll walk you guys through today, just a little bit of it. And then also you get a 1 hour call with me to be able to go through that. Because, right, Charli, you can probably think of things in your childhood, things that parents said, teachers said, role models that now in today in your adult life, knowing what you know now, right? We can't unknow what we know and what we've been
Right.
taught. It's just like, wow, like for so long I was believing X, Y, and Z about sex, or I thought it had to be this way because that's what I was told as a young person. So when working with clients, this is one of my favorite things to do with them because you see that light bulb moment go off when they're like, wait, I actually don't believe that shit anymore. Like, I want to do better. I want to be better when it comes to this stuff. And so that's really like what we get to do really early on in this work with this tool.
I'm so excited to dive into it. I could think of a million things what's interesting to me is doing the timeline, I'm sure like makes it that much more aware to your clients and the people you work with about what the things were that programs them. But even when you can articulate what it was, you still have to actively try to suppress that all the time. Like for me, even though I can name my triggers or name my patterns, doesn't mean that they just magically go away. It really takes work reprogramming that, even though you can identify what it was. And I mean, little things, and it's not just sex, right? It's everything from our childhood, the way we were talked to about marriage and relationships and friends and success. Like, I mean, it could snowball into so many more things. But I remember Lex saying something somewhere along the way, and Lex was our instructor who headed up the sex and relationship coaching program we did. And she said something about how she had started working as like a business coach, and she discovered that if you could tackle the intimacy struggles in your life, like it bled out into every other part of your life. And so she decided to focus on the intimacy and sex. And that landed so hard for me because it's true. Like the things that come up, and I'm interested to hear what you see specifically from the sex therapy side. How much are your clients bringing to you about the other things in their life that have the same common denominators as what's happening in their intimacy life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like if you even just think through the communication piece of it, right? If you can talk to your partner, if you can talk to somebody else around sex, like arguably the most intimate part of your life, you can probably talk to them about anything.
Hmm.
So that's like doing this work, getting really good at one, knowing yourself, and then knowing you as your intimate self, what sort of confidence that can help bring out into a person. And, I think back when I started this work, again, literally a decade ago, like how I started to show up differently at work and how I carried myself at work. And even in talking, right, I worked in a predominantly male industry at the time when I was my little research self, right, at the VA hospital working with veterans. And so I was constantly surrounded by men. And so it was like just knowing that confidence, knowing who I was, like you said, like reprogramming some of these things that for so long, carried me. I should look a certain way, or I should dress a certain way, or I should talk a certain way, act a certain way. And I feel like this is heavier for women too, specifically, not to say that men don't go through some of these same things. My male clients, same thing. What were they told about their penises growing up, or what they should do in relationships, or when they should enter relationships? I mean, we could talk for days about this stuff, right? But
I know I could get on a soapbox for sure. And men, I think, I only have had women on this show. Ironically, I'm actually recording an episode with my husband later today, but I only talk to women and I only work with women. And so that's always an ongoing topic is from the women's perspective, but it is for men just the same. Like whether it's their emotions, whether it's their desires and their fantasies, feeling safe enough to say that, like men struggle with it just in different ways, just like the women do.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so let's talk about the sex timeline. I'm really excited to do this for myself.
Mhm. Yeah, so if one of the very first things on here that I ask people through is how do you remember learning about sex? And for so many people, right, it's like, wow, I haven't thought about that for a really long time. But if you really take a minute and sit down and think, how do I remember learning about sex? Most people will say, it was in school, right? They had like boys over here, girls over here, the birds and the bees talk, don't have sex, you're gonna get pregnant, you're gonna get STI, right? A lot of people were taught abstinence back then. And even now it's like this is crazy to me, but so sex education, there is no like US wide curriculum that teachers have to teach. For so many schools, teachers, when they have the sex ed class, they essentially are creating their own curriculum. So you a lot of times are getting the views of that teacher in your class that you were taught as a kid, even still to this day. That was like when I was going through the sex therapy program, that was like one of the mind-blowing things that I learned. Like there's not even a legit thing, like a sex positive based thing. Even now, that was in 2018 when I went through this program. But anyways, so you think back to this, how do you remember learning about sex? Yeah, it might have been in school, but think about those messages that you got even before you had that class in school. Because I think for most of us, we weren't in class, like in health class, and that was truly the first time that you even heard the word sex or the concept, right? If you think about, this is probably a popular one that a lot of people have experienced, but if you're watching TV as a family and there's a sex scene or a kissing scene, right? You're told to look away, you're told to close your eyes, earmuffs, things like that, or shutting the TV off, right? And as a child, if you're asking questions around that, I'm curious what your response was, right? You probably got shut down. You probably said it was not age appropriate, it wasn't for you, you didn't need to know this. But I would argue that, right? Like I argue a lot of times, like what is age appropriate education that we give people? Because we are born to be sexual beings, and messages like that, like shutting your eyes, looking away, like that teaches us that sex is bad. That teaches us that it shouldn't be a good thing, or this is a dirty thing or something to be shameful over. When in reality, it's not. Most of us, that's how we got even on this planet, right? Was through sex
Right.
happening. Yeah, it's like, why is it so bad? And just again, so I want to make this point too. If you think about how you were taught sex ed, or your parents, gave you those messages, I want you to take a moment then to think about your grandparents and how likely your parents were taught about sex or lack thereof, right? Because it really is this trickle down effect. So one of the points when I'm working with clients, I'm like, look, we have to rewrite the script. So I work with a lot of parents on sex positive education and how they can create a more sex positive space within their household. So they're not coming, their kids are not ending up in therapy or coaching or whatnot, like having to rework through all these shameful experiences in their life.
So I'm thinking about this first part of the timeline, and I'm thinking about obviously my own experience. And for me, it was definitely shows, movies. There were a couple of movies in the house. There were all women in my house, right? We all female dominated for sure. My mom was a single mom and all sisters. And there were a couple of VHSs that I knew I wasn't allowed to watch. And all my sisters were much older than I was. And I didn't know why I wasn't allowed to watch them, but that was so enticing that if anyone left me alone for long enough, I was going to watch it. And it was a VHS. So, you had to rewind and fast forward and keep it in its little spot and hide your tracks, if you will.
Mhm.
But, hearing you talk about the parents shutting you down, I hear a lot of clients and myself included. If I were to watch a movie as an adult with anybody, and a intimate scene comes on, I would naturally get uncomfortable. And I think that goes back to the childhood too, right? If you're taught to be uncomfortable because somebody says something or somebody makes a big deal out of it, it's not just, oh, this is just another part of the movie. You carry that shit forever, right? Like whether it's like, oh, let me busy myself or let me act like I'm not interested in this or something with just friends, right? And that made me think of that. I thought that was really interesting. And I don't remember having like a sex conversation. I can remember having questions and asking my mom, but I was never given the birds and the bees conversation. Not that I can like definitively remember. I'm not gonna like call out my mom and say, you didn't give it to me. Maybe she did. It just did not stick out to me. But I knew I could ask questions and she would answer them, but I wasn't super keen on doing that either. So my education came from experience or
Mhm.
friends, right?
Mhm.
And now I work with a lot of college girls as clients, and either them or the guys that they're hooking up with, it's porn, which
Mhm.
is an even crazier idea that that's how they're learning how to have sex and what is normal and not, and so on. So yeah, that made me go down a little rabbit hole of my own while you were explaining that.
Yeah, and so often it is porn. It's either, back in our day, like Cinemax late night or Adult Swim, like things like that, or even just like watching R-rated movies after your parents went to bed or, up late at night. And I think that was probably thinking through early on, like that was probably my earliest exposure, or like seeing boobs and thinking like, ooh, that's cool, right? That's sexy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you guys are getting excited about this, so that must be something sexy. But yeah, when you think through this, and this is what the sex timeline is designed to do, it's really almost like you're journaling out your experiences. Because again, when you think back to these things, most of us haven't thought back about the first time, or those early childhood experiences or memories that we have around intimacy or sex or relationships. But I swear it's like Pandora's box. Like once you open that, I have clients all the time. They come to the next session like, oh my God, Rachel, like I remember this and this and this, like even like menstrual cycle stuff, right? How often were we shamed for getting our period? Or I had one of my recent clients was like, I couldn't wear tampons. My mom wouldn't let me wear tampons because she didn't want anything to go in my vagina. I'm like,
Same.
oh,
That's how I was. Uh-huh. I had to
it's
hide tampons, buy them for myself. And she just didn't. I mean, for her, it was just, you're too young to do that. And I don't know that I disagree with her now that I have my own daughter, but I didn't want to ask any questions. And maybe she would have bought them for me after a certain point, but I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go get them on my own and let her think I'm using pads and just like ignore the conversation. Right. But yeah, yeah. periods, masturbation,
Mhm.
right? I have
Yeah.
this come up with a lot of women where either they were caught or someone else was caught close to them and it was made a huge deal about. And then they were shamed and still
Mhm.
feel shame for the rest of their adult life, like until they can actually start to reprogram that about their body, touching their body, pleasure, so many
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. And that's actually also listed on the timeline too, is like same thing, thinking about how you remember learning about self-pleasure. And for so many of us, it probably was a time where you were by yourself. I hear so often from women, it's like if they were taking a bath, the water hitting over their vulva too hard, or if they were wiping and they wiped and they're like, oh, that felt good for some reason, right? For me, it was like I was a stomach sleeper. So when I would sleep on my stomach, my hands would be right in that area. And I'm like, and I just remember like pressure there felt good. So I was literally masturbating at such a young age. Like I didn't even know what it was yet at that time. And I was raised by my dad. My parents were divorced when I was 2. So I was not getting any sort of sex education. Right? In fact, a lot of it came from my grandma, who born and raised in the South, like very conservative thoughts. Like, so I got shamed for having boys over, I got shamed for wanting to wear thongs. She would cut up my thongs. I mean, God rest her soul, I love her. She's my favorite person in the world. But, thinking through again, like some of these things. And I think by that time I started wearing thongs, I was like already in my rebel stages. Like, and you bring up porn. This is how I knew I was meant to be a sex educator. In high school, my best friend, her mom would go up north. We would host parties at her house. I would turn on porn. She had a big giant tube TV, like a big screen TV in her living room. And I would turn on porn during these parties for people to watch, like not trying to like force people, but I was so fascinated by it. And I wasn't encouraging people to have sex or anything. It was literally like I was hosting a discussion around what was happening in the porn. And then, but at that time, even then, knowing my high school self, knowing that this shit was not real, this was stage, like this was a performance. And yeah, it just I still think to that day, I'm like, wow, people thought I was probably one such a slut, because here I am like promoting porn at school. But also probably a weirdo in some cases too, depending who you ask. But
I love that you were fascinated by it. I can't remember how old I was when I first, I mean, the movies I was watching, if I could go back and watch them, the ones I was sneaking around to watch, it was like Porky's. Did you ever watch Porky's?
I don't think so, though.
So Porky's, God, it was old then, I think. I think it was like made in the 80s or something. And it wasn't so much that they were having sex, like it wasn't like porn sex. It was definitely insinuated and there was like noises, but body parts. You could see their body parts. And I remember thinking like, "Oh my God, I had no idea that's what I grew up in a house full of women. I knew what women's bodies looked like. I didn't know what men's bodies looked like." And so I remember asking my mom questions about penises. I didn't understand. Like I knew that something happened that made the baby, but I didn't understand the mechanics of it. And so I can remember asking her something about if it like stayed wrinkly or if it was smooth or if they just held it in from an innocent mind of a child. And I don't remember her answer. I remember her answering me and not like shaming me for asking. And so I love her for that. And I don't remember her exact answer, but I do remember thinking like, okay, just make it make sense. I need it to make sense. And there were, Playboy magazines and Hustler magazines and um yeah, but porn itself, I too was fascinated by it. Like all the different genres whenever I did start to like consume it and watch it, but almost for like the entertainment value because it was not real. Like most of it was not real that I saw and it was almost comical, like the storylines and things like that. So I totally agree. I don't know what I would have felt like going to, I guess maybe a high school party and having porn on, but I can imagine that that definitely got some attention, to say the least.
Yeah. I think looking back, like my goal is just to normalize it for people. Um,
Yeah.
I'd like to think that's what my goal is now, as my adult self. But really, I think that's what I was doing. Like, and I was always the friend people would come to talk about sex. And I wasn't a person like in those younger years, I wouldn't consider myself overly sexual. I was a serial monogamous person. Like I was so scared of even kissing somebody that I wasn't dating. Like I was so afraid of being a prude. I was so afraid of being a slut. And so I tried so hard. I'm like, okay, if I just keep a boyfriend and I don't cheat on them, I will stay in this perfect little box and no one will think of me, in a sort of a negative light. And I would say to this day, that's one of my regrets. Like, I wish I would have had more sex as a young person, college girl, early 20s. Um, so yeah,
Well,
anyways.
now you get to do it with your husband. You just do all the different versions with him. There's so much safety in that. Um, so what are some of the other questions on the timeline, just to give some examples?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions around self-pleasure, memories of your first self-pleasure experience, remembering again how you were talked about or how it was presented to you. There's questions around the very first time you had sex, the first time and the most recent last time that you had sex. But the sex timeline is to create this literally a timeline of events to where it's like, okay, I had sex ed at this age. I gave my first blowjob at this age. I had maybe a traumatic sexual event at this age. At this time is when I started to experience low desire or shame. At this time, used my first tampon. I mean, everybody's timeline looks different. And that's really, it helps from me from the therapist side to see like what I can look at somebody's timeline and see, okay, this, and this, like, let's process this more because this is likely what stemmed from or what is stemming your lower desire or why you feel unsafe to be able to talk about sex to your partner or share your needs with your partner, right? And so that's really what the timeline is designed to do. And so as I mentioned, like for people, if they want to take on this offer, you get the timeline and then you get that 1 hour call with me to be able to, I get access to your timeline beforehand to dive into that. And for some people, it's like, okay, that's it. That's all they want. They just get to scratch the surface. And oftentimes other people get on that and they're like, okay, I actually think I would benefit from doing more coaching or therapy in this area of my life. It seems like there is a lot to explore here.
I love that. I'll definitely share that in the show notes for anyone who's interested in working on their timeline. I'm interested from like your perspective with the clients you've worked with so far. They're obviously coming to you for sex therapy, which kind of insinuates that they're having some sort of problem they're trying to overcome and unpack.
Mhm.
How how successful do you think most people are in overcoming some of these things and rewriting their story? Either like whether they're single or in a relationship. What's your experience more in marriages or relationships versus single?
Mhm. Most of my clients are in relationships, whether if I'm seeing them as a couple or if I'm seeing an individual that is in a relationship. I primarily work with women. I would say success wise, yeah, like can it be done for sure? We're not gonna have one call and you're gonna think, okay, now I can think differently, right? Even
Mhm.
me, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, like even sometimes me, when I'm around my dad specifically, hearing him say things about sex or the way a woman's dressing or whatever it is, right? Like old white male.
Mhm.
We won't go down that path. But anyways, love my dad. But
Different episode.
yeah, he'll say things and and sometimes I want to be on his side and like be that good girl and be like, oh yeah, dad, like laugh with you. But a lot of times like I have to check my, I'm like, no, like that is bullshit. You can't say stuff like that. Or so, there's a point to it where I'm like, I can't fix you. You don't want to be fixed. You're going to believe what you're going to believe. And sometimes that happens for clients. Like, yeah, their belief might be something that's limiting to them, but they might not want to change it. It might be not their time. They might not be ready. They might not feel like they have the resources yet. And so that's where, with this work, like we can only take a person as far as they're willing to go. And then maybe a year from now, they work with a different therapist or a different intimacy provider, right? And maybe that's their time. So this really is a journey. I don't believe there's ever a time you come to your life where, right, you've perfected communication, you've perfected intimacy. It's constantly things are changing and things are constantly going to come up to challenge you.
Oh yeah, the goal is constantly changing. Like you think you get there and then something changes and it's all relative. And one of the quotes I love, and I don't even know who it originally came from, but it's healing is in the integration. Like if you learn yourself, you learn your triggers, your patterns, and you can dive into the childhood trauma that you may have had. That's great, right? That's a great education on yourself. But then you have to wait for these triggers to actually come up in real time and act differently, like handle them differently. That's the integration. So it's one thing to learn yourself so well, but it is a completely different one to actually enact the change that you're wanting to happen. And it's trial and error. It is so messy. And it is not like one time and you've got it all figured out, like because you're changing. the people you're in partnerships with are changing and they're pushing back, going through this journey as someone who's not in a relationship, I'm sure is a much different experience than someone who's in a committed marriage or relationship where it's like it's not just their journey. Like they've got a whole ass other human, a deeply flawed human, like we are also deeply flawed on the other side of this that you're trying to navigate with, which makes it that much more complex.
And scary too, right? Like what if you and your partner don't see eye to eye on your beliefs around sex or intimacy, and then you bring in a child into the mix? It's like, okay, what do we
Yeah.
want to teach your child? I mean, it's very complex stuff. And I would, back to your original question around this, like the success rate, I love working with single people, single women specifically, because to do this work as a single woman, you get to like just reject any bullshit that comes along your way,
Mhm.
right? In the dating industry and like in the dating field, you know right away when you've done this work, like you know who is meant to be your partner, what sort of red flags you need to look out for, you know from yourself, like what patterns have been part of my past that I want to avoid now going into new relationships. We already talked about the confidence in doing this work and how you present yourself after doing this work for yourself. So yeah, I love working with single women because I think that, yeah, it's just a whole beast to work with a woman that has done this work and healed this part of herself.
Well, and they have so much power. There's not a whole ass human on the other side of this that they're having to navigate. They get to have all the power themselves. And I with my single girls that I work with now, and I always tell them, I'm like, we are practicing. Like every date you go on, every relationship you step into, or every intimate encounter you have, and before you're in a monogamous, like committed relationship is practice. And
Mhm.
each person that it fails, you're learning something about yourself. You're learning what you do want in a partner and what you don't want, but you're also learning like how they made you feel. I say this too with my clients, like chase the feeling, not the person while you're in that dating stage, because it's the feelings you're after. How are they making you feel? Because that's the power, right? And you get to trust that intuition and run with it because you're not tied down by anyone. You're not having to make a relationship work or reinvent it. You're getting to build it from scratch. And so I would say even more so for women who are not in relationships to do this work, like you said, it is so, so, so powerful. Huge, huge
Yeah.
in their growth and evolution for sure. And couples, right? I mean, I'm not going to take anything away from that. Um, but sometimes with couples, I feel like it's like a compatibility is probably not the right word, but like their sexual appetites are different. And sometimes they're seeking out help because they're wanting to fulfill something for their partner versus fulfilling it for themselves, which is a very different reason for starting this journey. Right.
100%. Yeah, most, and that's again early on. I'm like, why are you here for you? Like,
Hmm.
understand. Usually he has his desires and right, you're, and then it just again that person, like they're getting the finger pointed at them. It's a you problem. You need to fix it. You need to go to therapy. You need to do coaching. Um, and I fully believe that desire stuff is a we issue, not a you or a me. But in two, I think sometimes people and couples are face more challenges around this as well, because if they don't have a supportive partner, right? If they don't have their partner that they can go to and say, like, hey, this week, just this morning, I sent my husband a text message. I'm like, sorry, my libido has been fucked this last week. Like, I have not been, I told you I'm about to be day one of menstrual any hour now. And so in that luteal phase, like my desire is so low, and I'm like, I still feel connected, I still love you, like we're not fighting, we're not arguing, but like my availability for sex. And in the past, I would have let guilt set in and be like, oh, I should have sex with him, right? I should do something I don't want to do to please the man. And I no longer live in that. So this constant work, right, with timeline stuff, when I am faced even in my own life with some of these things, or clients are going through it, I'll often say, like, okay, where does this come from? Where is this belief coming from? Like, what has happened in the past that has brought me here today? And do I still want to move forward with this, or do I want to change with how I'm moving forward with, whatever it might be in that moment?
Oh my God, I could keep going on forever just from the statement you just said. But we'll wrap up here because honestly, I don't know where I would stop if we kept going. I'm going to share the resource for the sex timeline into your website, into your podcast. You have so many amazing guests on and so many great topics. So anyone who digs podcasts, if you're here already, go listen to Rachel's podcast. All right, Rachel, I want to hear your hype list. And I don't know if you've listened to an episode before or not, but we do A hype list, it's kind of a spin-off of an assignment I give to clients, which is celebrating their achievements and the obstacles that they overcame in order to get there. So I just want you to share one achievement, one obstacle, something you can brag about and be full of yourself and proud of for. It can pertain to this or just totally random. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I literally so many. I want to say, so I shared with you, I think before recording, but I started my own private practice this year. Like that is fucking crazy. You know, I stood in
Oh,
my
great.
for so long to do that. I was so scared to do that. And then yeah, this year officially, like if anybody that's local in Michigan, I'm able to work with them and their insurance gets to pay for it, which is quite nice. But yeah, so that's my hype squad thing for the day for sure.
Oh, yeah. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. This was so great. I appreciate you coming and getting hyped with me. And everyone listening, thank you for being here and be kind to yourselves today and every day.
Thank you.
Bye.